Shalom, everyone, to Pathways to the Orchard. Tonight, we will be learning Parshat Kedoshim. It begins like this. Medaber Hashem al Moshe lemor. God spoke to Moshe, saying, Daber kol adat b'nei Yisrael, v'amarta alehem. Speak to the entire congregation of Israel, and say to them, Kedoshim to you, you shall be holy, Ki kadosh ani Hashem Elokechem, because I, your God, am holy. So that's how Parshat Kedoshim begins, and it's explained that it doesn't say this all the time, but Moshe gathered the entire congregation, call adat b'nei Yisrael, because what he was about to tell them was so important. Now, we should know that this is not the only place where it mentions that we should be a holy people, a holy nation, or that God is holy. But since the whole parsha is called Kedoshim, and it begins with this idea that Kedoshim to you, you shall be holy, because I, your God, am holy. So obviously, this is a central focus of all the different times it says that you should be holy. So let's begin by understanding what holiness is, what Kedusha is. Usually when we think of Kedusha, we think of spiritual, of righteousness, of purity, godliness, and those are all true. When one is holy, one is connected to all of those concepts. But on the most simple level, and in a certain way, it's the foundation of understanding holiness, is when the same letters, the same root of holiness becomes a verb. It means to separate. It means to dedicate or designate or separate. That is the literal meaning of Kedusha. And the important example that is brought, that at the time of the temple, if someone wanted to donate money or an object, so in their home, they would designate this animal I am going to bring for an offering, or this money I'm going to bring. And the verb is, it becomes hekdesh, because it's separated, it's designated, dedicated for a certain purpose. And so the basis of the idea of Kedusha is idea of separating ourselves from sin, separating ourselves from influences that will push us in a direction of not holiness. And when God says you will be a holy people, it's connected with being separated. So where do we see this? We see this at the very end of this portion. The very end of this portion, the idea of God separating Israel appears three times within just a few verses. So it says like this. So it says the Omar lachem atem tirushu et admatam. So God says, I'm saying to you, you will inherit the land. Ani etnena lachem l'reshet ota. I'm giving it to you for you to inherit it. Eretz zavat chalav u'duvash, land flowing with milk and honey. Ani Hashem Elokechem, asher hivdalti etchem min amim. I am God, your God, who has separated you from the other nations. Now, the word here is hivdalti, which is the word havdalah. As the ritual that we do after Shabbat, where we separate from the holy and the profane. We're going out of Shabbos. We're going out of a special designated day, and we're going back into the week, into the mundane. So we do the ceremony of separation, but that's the word that's used here, but it has the same meaning as separation in the context of Kedusha. Then it says, the very next verse says, V'hivdaltem bein habehema atorah letameh. And then it says, and you shall separate between the pure animals and the impure animals. Ubein ha'of hatameh letahor, and from the different birds that are designated as either kosher or not kosher, pure or impure. And then in the same sentence at the end, it says, and all of the creeping crawlies on the earth, that asher hivdalti lechem l'tameh, I have separated them out and designating for you as being tameh. In other words, there's certain animals we can eat and can't eat. Same thing with fish, same thing with birds. But God is explaining it with the language of, I've separated away from that which is pure, those things that are impure. And then actually it says a fourth time, Vayitem li Kedoshim, and you shall be holy. Ki Kadosh ani Hashem. It's like the beginning of the parsha, because I am holy, you shall be holy. Ve'avdil etchem min ha'amim liot li, and I have separated you from the nations to be mine. So here there are 4 different times that the same root of separation is used to in explaining our relationship with God, but especially the last verse is, you shall be holy because I am holy and I have separated you. So all of this was just to explain that on the simple level, the literal level, holiness means to be separated, to designate, to make special. So when God says, I've separated you, it means I have made you special. So it's explained that there are 2 different types of holiness, of Kedusha. One is a type of holiness that we can work towards. We could try to reach a level of holiness. And that is through Torah and mitzvot, spiritual practice, and separating ourselves from evil speech, from looking at things that we shouldn't be looking at, from exposure to influences that are not healthy for us. And in the beginning of the parsha, when it mentions about Kedusha, so the commentaries say, any place that you see a guard against improper sexual relations, there you will find holiness. And that's why at the end of the preceding parsha, Achrei Mot, there's a whole long list of relationships that are forbidden between people. And relations meaning, of course, sexual relations. And the same thing at the end of this parsha of Kedoshim. Again, the Torah points out that in order to be holy, here are the list of relationships, brother and sister, with a man with his aunt, a man with his father's wife. There's a whole list of forbidden relationships. And again, it's the idea that when we separate ourselves from these kind of relationships or influences, That's where you find holiness. So the same thing with Shabbat. We call Shabbat Shabbos Kodesh, the holiness of Shabbat. And the whole thing of Shabbat, it's separate from the 6 days of the week. There are the 39 major types of work that we separate ourselves from, and that opens up the holiness of Shabbat. So that one type of Kedusha we can aim for, we can work spiritually for. And then there's another type of Kedusha that's innate in our neshamas. And we have this Kedusha, but it doesn't mean that we'll necessarily access it or even be aware of it. But there's a certain inbred, innate, natural holiness that every Jew has. So we have both types of this Kedusha. Now, Reb Shlomo, one of my favorite teachings from Reb Shlomo was that he used to say, not every Jew is holy. In other words, not every Jew acts in a holy way, but every Jew is the holy of holiest. Meaning that in the what's called the Pintele Yid, in the inside of every Jew is a natural holiness, not just a regular holiness, the holy of holies. So this is such a deep concept that we might not act in a holy way, but in our very essence, we're the holy of holiest. That's our potential. We might not develop it. We might not access it. We might not even be aware of it, but it's there. And it just needs to be kindled. One of the understandings of Kedusha is to light a fire is sometimes referred to as Yikod Eish. To ignite a fire is from the same idea of Kedusha. Yikod is the two of the letters of Kedusha, and then Eish is the shin of Eish and the shin of Kadosh. Yikod Eish is Kedusha. So if we look in the Parsha, and again, if this whole Parsha is called Kedoshim, then many of the things in the Parsha will be connected. And we see that this idea of separation comes up over and over again. We already mentioned that at the end of the Parsha, we see that the word Havdalah appears 4 different times. And especially the last time where it says, you shall be holy because I am holy, and I have separated you from all of the nations to be mine. And that's why in Judaism, a marriage ceremony is called Kiddushin. It's where a man and woman, they separate themselves from all other men and women. And they make what's called a Brit Nisuin, a covenant of marriage. But this covenant of marriage means that the man says to the woman, you're separated to me from all the women on the face of the earth. And the same thing with the woman. You are separated from all the men on the face of it. And that's what makes the basis for the Kiddushin, for the sanctity of marriage, is based on no one else it gets involved between the two of us. We see in much of Western society that doesn't hold anymore. There's a lot of what we call playing around happening. And that, in a sense, destroys the sanctity of the relationship. But we see it in many other things. I've already mentioned Shabbat. And so Shabbat is mentioned in this parsha also. And Shabbat is based on it's separating it from the other 6 days of the week. And not to separate, but again, I use the word sanctify, designate, choose, and make special. But then we have a number of agricultural laws called leket, shichacha, and peah, where when the owner of the field is harvesting, if he drops any of the produce along the way, or if he forgets a certain amount of the produce, and or we're told you have to leave a corner of the field. So these are all actions of separating. In other words, the owner of the field has the right to his produce, but the leftovers and the forgotten sheaves and the corn of the field was designated by God, by the Torah, for the poor, for the orphan, for the widow, meaning everyone who is poor. These parts were separated for them. And it's the same thing with all of the tithes. All of the tithe, a person can't eat the produce until the tithes have been taken off. Those were separated for the Kohanim, the Levim, and the poor, depending on the year and the circumstances. That was separated from it. And we can't eat of the produce until we have separated. Also in this parsha, it talks about how you can't eat blood. And so if you think about the koshering process, the way we make meat kosher, we salt it in order to remove the blood. The blood needs to be separated from the animal for us to be able to eat it, for it to be kosher. So again, these are all actions of separating, of designating. And then we have also the different mixtures that are mentioned in this parsha. One is you can't mix linen and wool. You can't mix different types of seeds. In other words, you can't take barley and wheat and mix them together and sow your field. Also, in sexual relations, about a person with an animal. So all of these are different types of mixtures, but the basis is that we have to separate between different mixtures and keep a certain order to the universe. So these are all just examples of separation that is the basis of Kedusha. Like we said before, our natural inclination when we think of holiness is to think of purity and righteousness and light and joy and godliness and spirituality. And it's all true. And it's all available and accessible. But we see that the bottom line is there has to be a certain order. There has to be certain red lines. Certain things are pure, certain things are impure, certain things are kosher, certain things are not kosher. So the whole methodology of making separations is the basis of the entire Torah. But here we're told that not just that, but it's the basis of coming to a state of Kedusha. When there are no borders between things, then Kedusha doesn't exist. So this, in a certain way, is an introduction to the idea of Kedusha. So now I want to present a very potent meditation that's part of our daily prayers. every morning we, as part of our service to God, our praise of God. So in the section that leads into the Shema, there is a section where we imagine, we visualize the angels praising God. And it's very, very poetic. And it talks about how they gather together. They take upon themselves the yoke of heaven. They designate to their creator song, and they sing to God in a clear voice, in a pure voice. And it's called Kedusha. Kedusha kulam ke'echad onim be'ema ve'omrim be'yira. And in great holiness, all of the angels as one, they answer to each other and they sing together in great awe. Kadosh, 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 Hashem Tzavakot, Melo Kol Ha'aretz Kavodo. This is a verse from Isaiah, from Yeshayahu. And Yeshayahu had a vision, and he was in the angelic realms. And he witnessed, he saw how the angels praised God in this way. Holy, holy, holy is the God of hosts. The whole world is full of his glory. And then it says like this, Va'ofanim v'chayot HaKodesh. Now these are names of different strata of angels. Ofanim are called wheel angels. V'chayot HaKodesh, and the holy beings. This part comes from Ezekiel, from the vision of the chariot. Barash Gadol, in a great uplifting unison. Mitnasim lumat seraphim, and they come across from the fire angels, the seraphim. Lumatam b'shavchim v'omrim, and they say and praise God by saying, Baruch kavod Hashem mimakomo. Blessed is the glory of God from his place. So this is part of the morning prayers every day of the year, whether it's a ordinary day, it's a holiday. Every shachrit has these words in them. Holy, holy, holy is the God of hosts. The whole world is full of his glory. And again, this was the vision of Isaiah. This is what he saw, the angels, how they're praising God. And then the sages took from Ezekiel and the idea that there are wheel angels. They're called wheel angels because we imagine them as being round, and living beings, Chayot HaKodesh, and other angels called fire angels, Seraphim. And they praise God by saying, Baruch Kavod Hashem Mimkomo. So this is the basis of a beautiful meditation. So we have the word Kadosh 3 times. And then it says, Melo Kol Ha'aretz Kavodo, and the earth is full of the glory of God. So Kabbalistically, we know that there are 4 Kabbalistic worlds. These are really states of consciousness, and they all exist in this world, even though there is we'll call it a hierarchy. The higher the world, the more spiritual it is, the closer to God it is, and the less physical and material it is. So these 4 worlds are the world of emanation, Atzilut, the world of creation, Bria, the world of formation, Yitzira, and the world of action, world Asiya. That's our world. So here, there's a beautiful visualization. For those who watched, and if you didn't, you still can, the class from Achrei Mot, we talked about visualization. We talked about how it enriches our prayers, our performance of mitzvot, by having a kavana, by having an intent where we visualize what we are talking about. So here we're in the angelic realm, and so there's a way to envision what is happening here. So it says kadosh, holy, holy, holy. So we can envision that these are three levels of holiness in the three higher worlds: the world of Atzilut, the world of Bria, and the world of Yetzirah. And then it says, Melo kol ha'oretz kvodo. The whole earth is full of his glory. That's our world. So what we can see here is we can envision the holiness of God being drawn down through the worlds, through levels of consciousness, into this world, and that we can imagine and visualize the whole world is full of the glory of God. So we've drawn from the upper realms all the ways to this earth. But then if we look what happens now, and I'll read it again, the ha'ofanim, and then it says that the circle angels, the wheel angels, again, these are angels that Ezekiel saw. Well, these are the angels that interact with this world. And then it says v'chayat kodesh. So now we're going back up. At first we drew down holiness, and now we're bringing it back up. We're dedicating it to God. We're praising God. And so we are like the wheel angels. We are like the holy, the Chayat Kodesh, the holy beings. And they come, Barash Gadol Minasim Lumat Serafim, they come next to the fire angels. So this, we're going up the worlds. The fire angels are the angels in the world of Bria. And there we say, Baruch Kavod Hashem Mimkamo. That's the praise of the angels, is blessed is the glory of God from his place. So here we imagine we've drawn down holy, holy, holy. The whole world is full of his glory. And then we reverse and we go from the world of Asiyah to the world of Yetzirah to the world of Bria. And then we say, blessed is the glory of God from his place. So we imagine God is in the highest of the worlds, Atzilut. And that is how we visualize the world of Atzilut, where the light and the vessels are all one. And it's a world of pure holiness, of pure spirituality, without the physical and the material. So this in itself is a beautiful meditation of, and this is such a big part of Judaism, the idea of drawing down God's light into the world. Here we're drawing down God's holiness and his glory. But then once we've drawn it down, in a certain way, we return it to God from our own initiative, from below to above. This is a concept. There's an awakening from above to below, where God awakens us. And then there's the awakening from below to above, where we, through our own initiative, awaken our spiritual essence and use it to return to God, to connect to God, to praise God. But there's one secret here. So as I said, we end by saying, Baruch Kavod Hashem Mimkamo. Blessed is the glory of God from his place. So here we imagine his place is very ethereal in the higher worlds. beyond, transcendent. But this is a teaching from Rav Ginsburg. And from the time I learned this, every time I say this, this is part of my kavana, is that if you take in the verse, Baruch kavod Hashem mimkamo, blessed is the glory of God from his place. You take the word glory, kavod, kavod equals 32. Kavod Hashem, Hashem equals 26. So 32 times 26 equals 832 equals Eretz Yisrael. So here, at first, we think that the glory of God is from his place way up there. But the other way to understand this is, blessed is the glory of God from his place. What is his place? Eretz Yisrael. The glory of God as manifest in Eretz Yisrael. So this sounds like a bit of a contradiction. Is God's place up there or is it down here? But of course, the answer is both. God is everywhere. The glory of God is everywhere. But here it's important to understand that we want to bring this glory of God down to this world. We want this world to be full of the glory of God. And that's the secret of the Mishkan, of the temple, is where we make a dwelling place for God in this world. And beyond the Mishkan in the temple, we want to make a place for God in our hearts, in our minds, in our soul. That's the ultimate destination that God wants. Because when God first revealed the idea of a Mishkan to Moshe, it says, "Asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham." Make for me a holy place, and I will dwell in their midst. And the teaching is in the midst of each and every person. So this is a very, very beautiful meditation, but I'm going to add a very important teaching from the Maggid of Mezrich, who said, Atzilut is here. He said it in Yiddish. But the world of Atzilut, which we imagine to be way, 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 way up there, is here. All the worlds are here. And that's why we can conceive of these Kabbalistic worlds are actually states of human consciousness. They exist on many, many different levels, and there is a hierarchy to them. But ultimately, all of them are in this world. And so this meditation where God's place is there, is up there, and down here in Eretz Yisrael and everywhere in between. God's glory is everywhere. But this is a very, very beautiful and potent meditation. And now I want to go back to the very beginning of the Parsha, because in many years, when it's not a leap year, the previous Parsha, Achrei Mot, and Kedoshim are read on the same Shabbat. Not always, but many times they're read in the same Shabbat. And so people, somewhere along the line, someone came up with this idea of Achrei Mot, that's the name of the previous Parsha, means after the death of. There it's talking about the death of Nadav and Avihu. And then this Parsha is Kedoshim. So they put it together. After their death, then they're considered holy. Meaning the idea that throughout Jewish history, and in fact, human history, there are certain people who will use the term are ahead of their times. And many times they're very misunderstood. And so when do we come to appreciate them? Achrei Mot, after they die, Kedoshim. Then we see how holy they are. So here in a Jewish sense, without going into all of Jewish history, but there have been many, many individuals who were somewhat controversial in their time. Sometimes, we know that many of the prophets were badgered, were pursued, were jailed, were killed. Only later do we understand how holy they were. And throughout Jewish history, there are many, many examples. I don't want to start naming them because I might leave some people out and include others that maybe some people think shouldn't be included. But there are many, many people who were ahead of their time. And in their lifetime, they had a lot of controversy, a lot of opposition. And only when they pass away do people come to realize how holy they are. And so in a relatively quick manner, I want to tell one of Reb Shlomo's favorite stories that really points this out. And when I say it was one of his favorite stories, because he told it often, and it became very, very known and associated with Reb Shlomo. And so I remember times hearing him tell the story, but he would sing the story, and he would do it with his guitar, and he did it in concert many, many times. So I'm going to tell the story relatively quickly, but it really is an awesome story. And it begins, it's in the 1550s in Krakow. And the cemetery of Krakow is very famous because there's many, many famous Jews who are buried there. And over the years, it was, destroyed and in part, but it still exists. And right outside the Jewish cemetery, under a tree, there is a grave site, and on it says Yosela HaKamtsana Kadosh, Yosela the Holy Miser. So what's the story? And why is he outside of the Jewish cemetery? Is because he was very, very, Yosela was very rich, which was an exception in the Jewish section of Krakow. People were dirt poor. And to everyone's anger, he would not give any money away. He hoarded all of his money for himself and his family. And at first, people approached him, but at a certain point, people gave up approaching him and even saying good Shabbos to him, anything. He was really an outcast. And yet he was quite wealthy. Yosela is dying. And so the burial society, the Chevra Kadisha, comes to him and says, Yosela, you can't take the money with you. This is your chance to do tshuva. This is your chance to give some of the money away, at least, to pay for your burial and to help some people out. And so Yosel had never given anything, said, I'll give you 50 ruble. And they said, 50 ruble? That's nothing. That's nothing. He says, I won't give any more. And they practically beg him. And they even say, if you don't give us money, that we're not going to bury you. He said, I've always taken care of myself. Somehow it'll work out. And he dies. And the burial society did what they said. They walked out on him. And his body was left there for a number of days, which is a very not good thing, not a Jewish thing to do. But everyone was so upset at him. Then someone had Rahmanas and said, okay, but this is not right. And he took him and he buried him outside of the Jewish cemetery. And that was it. He couldn't bear leaving his body like that. Okay, so the story continues. After this happens, it's a Thursday night, and the rabbi of the town is a very holy person, very knowledgeable person. And he gets a knock at the door Thursday night, and it's one of the poor people who says, Rabbi, I have no money for Shabbat. Can you spare a few ruble? He said, of course. And he gives him the money. And he leaves. 5 minutes later, another poor person comes and says, Rabbi, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I have no money for Shabbos. My children are hungry. He said, of course I'll give you. To make a long story short, there was like a parade of people coming to the rabbi. And he's starting to, what's going on here? So he started asking people, well, how come you never came to me before? So one of them said, by now there's like a whole crowd there. One of them says, well, every Thursday morning, I found an envelope under my door with 5 ruble, 7 ruble, 2 ruble, whatever it was. And so I've never had to come to you. So he says, he turns to someone else. It's like, is that what happened to you also? And he says, yes. And so the rabbi is like, what is going on here? And then it dawns on him. It must have been Yosela, the miser. There's no other explanation. Excuse me. So he asked one of them, well, did you ever have any contact with Yosela? Because everyone just stayed away from him. And he asked one person, and then everyone confirmed exactly what he said. He said, yeah, a long time ago, I went to him, and he greeted me very warmly. And he brought me into his house. He gave me something to eat and drink. And he said, why did you come? And he said, I said the truth, I'm so poor. I can't even feed my wife and children. So he said, oh, that's terrible. How much do you need to make it through the week? And so I told him 5 ruble. And he said, you'll pardon me, but I don't remember, where do you live? Where do you live? And I saw that he was writing this down. And then he left the room, and I'm thinking, oh, he's going to get me the 5 ruble that I asked him for. Yosela comes back and says, I'm not sure why you came here. You were probably expecting me to give you, but I can't give you. I don't give. I don't give. You should leave now. And I was like startled. I got up and I left. So the rabbi asked the other people, did this happen to you also? And they also, yeah. I went once, but he treated me at first really nice, but I was so embarrassed how he treated me at the end. I never went back. So the rabbi said, we missed this. We didn't understand what was going on here. Obviously, Yosela wanted to do the mitzvah and didn't want anyone to know. He didn't want the praise. He didn't want the people looking up to him. He wanted to do the mitzvah just pure. So the rabbi said, tell everyone, I'm calling a fast day. And next week, everyone come to the shul. We're going to fast, and we're going to ask God and Yosela for forgiveness. The way we treated him, practically didn't even bury him. And so that's what happened in Krakow. Everyone got together, and they fasted, and the rabbi at a certain point kind of like passed out. And when he was passed out, Yosela came to him and said, I see what you're doing, but you don't have to do all this. I know what I was doing. I know what I was doing. No forgiveness needed here. I wanted to give, and I wanted it to be anonymous. And so later, they write on his cover, Yosela Hakamtsana Kedoshim. This is the story, but there's another part of the story that Reb Shlomo would tell. So it's not as short as I thought it would be. Anyways, it's worth listening to the end. Some of you maybe know this story. So Reb Shlomo was invited, as he was often, to a gathering of many different religions and spiritual paths, ecumenical kind of gathering. And each night, a different religion or spiritual path would present. So Reb Shlomo was there, and because so many of these other religions and spiritual paths had so many Jews, he went to all of these looking for holy sparks. And he was able to extract hundreds and hundreds of people from different cults and different spiritual paths back to Judaism. Anyways, so it's his turn to present. And right before, though, he's meeting everyone, and he sees there's someone in the corner, looks kind of very distant. So he goes up to him and he says, "My holy brother, what's your name?" And he kind of hesitated, and he said, "My name is Joe." And he said, and what are you doing here? He says, "I'm an assistant bishop." He said, "Great. Hopefully we'll connect during this conference." That night, Shlomo told this story. Yosela, the holy miser. He tells the story. The next night is the assistant bishop's turn. And so he makes a presentation, and then he turns to Reb Shlomo and he says, "Could you tell that story again? That was such an amazing story. Could you tell it again?" And everyone like, "Yeah, tell it again." So Reb Shlomo tells it again. Okay, the conference goes on. It's the last day. And Joe comes up to Reb Shlomo and says, "I know this might sound crazy, but could you tell that story one more time?" So Reb Shlomo thought it was kind of unusual. He told the story again. And afterwards, Joe comes up to him and says, "I need to talk to you." And he says like this, "What I'm about to tell you, I have not told anyone." And here's my story. My mother was Jewish. She was in Auschwitz. And after Auschwitz was liberated, she survived. One of the soldiers there, who was not Jewish, met her and took a liking to her. And to make a long story short, he offered to bring her back to America. He needed a sponsor in those days. And he proposed to her. And he said, but I can only marry you on one condition, is you never tell anyone that you're Jewish. And the mother, okay, listen, she made it through Auschwitz, didn't have a penny to her name. Her whole family is gone. She's in a new country, and she agreed. And so they got married, And he was a very staunch Roman Catholic. And I was raised Catholic. I came to love it. I became an assistant bishop. I was moving up the ladder. I'm still young. And what happened is my mother was on her deathbed. And she called me in and said, I have to unburden my soul. And she told me the whole story. And she said, your real name is Yosela, and my hometown is Krakow. You were raised as Joe, but I just felt I had to tell you before I left this world. You're really Yosela from Krakow. And my mother passed away. I went into an identity crisis. I'm Jewish. I'm Yosela. I'm not Joe. And for weeks and months now, I've been struggling with who am I? Who am I? Where am I going to go in life? And so at a certain point, I said, God, please send me a sign. Please send me a sign. And I'm going to make the sign. And if you feel that I should be Jewish, then if I hear the idea of Yosela from Krakow, some story about a Yosela from Krakow, I'll know that that's a sign. That's who I need to be. So he said to Reb Shlomo, so when you told the story the first night, I was blown away. I was blown away. But I needed confirmation. So I asked you a second time, and then even a third time. Then he took out of his pocket an airline ticket. He said, I bought this a few days ago, but I didn't decide I was going to actually use it. I was still in a state of total confusion. But I've now decided I'm going to leave for Israel. No one is going to know. I'm not going to tell anyone. I'm going to disappear. And I'm going to start my life again as Yosela from Krakow. I don't know what will happen with me, but I owe you so much. I hope at some point I will meet a proper Jewish woman and I'll get married. And if that happens, I promise I'll write you and let you know. So Reb Shlomo says, every time he came to Israel, after that, he was looking for Yosela. He knew that most likely he would now have a beard and he'd be dressed differently. Didn't even know if he would recognize him. But Reb Shlomo said he kept on looking. He said 5 years later, he got a letter from Yosela. And Yosela is writing it at the Kotel. And he's saying, Reb Shlomo, I owe everything to you. And I want you to know that tomorrow I'm getting married. I'm writing this at the Kotel to tell you that I'm Yosela from Krakow because of that story that you told. What a story. But all of this was Achrei Mot Kedoshim. Is Yosela dies, the original Yosela dies, and they didn't even want to bury him until they figured out like what he had done all of these years, completely anonymously. And then he becomes Hakamtsana Kadosh, the holy miser. So this is an awesome story. And with this, we'll end our class on Kedoshim. And I bless all of us to be able to merit the type of holiness that we've been talking about all evening.